In this lesson, we break down the volume sourcing nodes and focus on the key parameters that control the motion of our fluids. So I'm picking up right where we left off in the last lesson. We have a box that we created using a shelf tool, and we've used it to emit particle fluids using the Emit Particle Fluid shelf tool. What we have is this box, it's our original box geometry, and then we have this Create Surface Volume node. Now this Create Surface Volume is what's controlling the initial velocity on the particles. And we can see that in the Velocity Volumes tab. And we're not going to cover every single parameter in every single one of these tabs. It would be sort of overkill. And also, they're not going to focus on exactly what we need to get up and running using fluids. We're just going to focus on what we're going to need to get up and running for right now. So let's focus primarily on the velocity volume. The velocity volume here has this option to add velocity. Now this is very similar to what we saw earlier when we looked inside the Autodop network. Go back there now, and we looked at this Flip Fluid Object node. When we were using the Flip From Object, we used this particular node's ability to add initial velocity right here, to initialize the velocity in whichever direction that we wanted it to be. But now that we're using this sourcing input on the Flip Solver, we have to go through this method of using volumes. Now, we know for a fact that that sourcing input inside the Flip Solver in the Autodop network is looking to this box, the volume that's created from it, and then to this Velocity Volumes tab, and here we add the velocity. So let's go ahead and add, say, 5 in the positive y direction. Now, let's move our box around a little so we can see what's happening, and we'll click play. And yeah, see, now we have that velocity. We have a push up in the positive in y, so the particles go up first and then fall out in all directions, just like we would if we would have initialized the velocity on a single object in Autodops. I'm going to stop my timeline, rewind. I'm just going to frame up my scene here a little better. There we go. And I want to make sure that I have real-time playback turned on. In fact, since I know that for the rest of this course we're going to be using real-time playback, I'm going to go ahead and set up the default so that that's always on. I can do that using this icon on the far right-hand side. This is the Global Animation Options. We'll go ahead and click on that. It'll open up this little dialog box. And we can set this Play Every Frame but Never Faster Than FPS and Real-Time Playback. We'll make sure that those are both checked. And then click Save as Default. It says Options Saved, so we know that it's been done, and we can close. Now we should, every time we open a scene from here on out, have this automatically turned on for us. Okay, back to velocity. Now that we're talking about this velocity volume, this is how we can add velocity. You notice that when we do, you can start to see these little red lines that sort of peek out from beyond the shape of our initial box. Well, there's a way that we can see inside that box and not damage it. And we can do that here on the Scalar Volumes tab. Under the Visualize dropdown, instead of Isosurface, change that over to Smoke. Now, you haven't actually changed anything in the way that Houdini is calculating this at all. All you changed was how you, the viewer, see it in the viewport. Now, instead of seeing that gray box surrounding our initial particle fluids here, what we're seeing is inside of it. So we can actually see the particles, we can actually see our guides a little better. So what use are those little guides? Let's come back to velocity volumes, and we're going to remove the initial velocity that we added. Well, you can see that our guides went away. That tells us there is no velocity on our particles right now, and we get a very boring, generic emission. You can kind of see that it looks very, very uniform. In fact, it looks computer generated, which is something we really want to avoid. In most cases, we're going to try to create natural-looking fluids, and natural-looking fluids all have some sort of randomized velocity on them. When you see fluid moving around in the real world, very, very rarely is all of it moving directly, exactly the same direction, exactly the same speed. So in order to add some of that turbulent effect and that randomness, Houdini has given us curl noise and the vortex. So here inside your velocity volumes, you can come over to curl noise, and you can click on the Add Curl Noise. Now as soon as you do, you notice that you get your guides back, and they're all sort of mangled up, sort of wild like a mop. If we rewind and click play, you can see that they're also animated. Now what this means is that each and every particle is getting a different velocity at the time that it's created based off of this randomized noise. Now gravity is still the strongest force, so gravity is pulling them down. However, this initial velocity has given them just a little bit of randomness, so the stream no longer looks so uniform. It no longer looks so computer generated. It's much more natural and very getting more and more realistic. Now, another tool that we have to work with here, we'll go ahead and turn off our curl noise and add the vortex, is the vortex. And you'll notice at first, I'm looking top down on my particles now. You'll notice at first that we don't have any guides because there's no velocity added to them at this point. We've just turned the vortex on. We can add the vortex by using this angular velocity parameter. We'll go ahead and slide it to the right, and as we do, look what happens. Our guides are drawn into our viewport, indicating that we're going to get some circular motion added to our particles. So let's set that just randomly somewhere in between about 3.5. We'll rewind our timeline and click play. And from looking down, you can see that yes, our particles are being almost like they're being flung off the end of a ceiling fan. There's some rotation to the way that particle stream is falling, which is very cool. In fact, if we tone it down just a little bit, take it down to something more like a 0.7, 0.75 to 1, somewhere in that area. I'm going to stop my timeline and rewind it. I'm going to add back in my curl noise, scale it down just a little bit to about a 0.25. Rewind my timeline and click play. Now what we have is a falling fluid. It's got enough randomness to it that it doesn't necessarily look fully computer generated. In fact, we've really got what looks like a stream of water falling from a faucet. And that's all because we were able to manipulate this curl noise and vortex property and be able to see what it's going to do ahead of time just a little bit to get an idea using our streamers so we know what effect our velocity is having on our simulation. So that's the basics of being able to adjust velocity and use this create surface volume node to influence the velocity of your particles in a particle stream. In the next lesson, we'll take a look at the flip tank.